This episode is sponsored by Voltoro. Keep on listening and you'll find out more about how you can buy allocated gold when the Bitcoin bull run reaches its peak. This way, you don't have to deal with infinitely inflationary fiat or banks that freeze your account. Also, note that trading involves risks and the information presented is not financial advice. This episode is also sponsored by Wasabi Wallet. Go to wasabiwallet.io, download Wasabi for your OS, and significantly boost your network level and transaction privacy. Hello there, and welcome to Season 9, Episode 5 of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and my guest today is Matt Hill, who is the CEO and co-founder of Start9 Labs, a very interesting company which seeks to provide the maximum amount of sovereignty in one device or multiple devices, depending on how you approach it and how you want to eliminate single points of failure. And today we're going to talk about sovereignty and independence and how Bitcoin sits in between all of these. And we can also dive into philosophy and what kind of philosophical implications there are with all of this. So hi, Matt. It's really good to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really happy because when I first found out about the Embassy OS, which is an operating system that you can use for your Raspberry Pi, I was very impressed that it can run so many applications on one device, and it's much more than the average Raspberry Pi Bitcoin node. It does Bitcoin, it does Lightning, just like pretty much all of the OSs that you can find, but it also has some applications that don't have much to do with Bitcoin per se, but allow you to decentralize in other directions. For example, you have Mastodon, which is like an open source Twitter replacement. And you also have, I think you are the only OS right now which also enables C-Lightning, which is the Lightning client and implementation developed by Blockstream. And you're also looking into adding stuff like WordPress, which is very useful for a lot of people, as many websites rely on WordPress and it's open source. It's really cool. And if you are able to just get a small Raspberry Pi, an external drive to store all of your data, as well as some sort of UPS, I suppose you no longer need ever to access some sort of overpriced cloud services.
That was a nice overview. Yeah, I appreciate that. As you mentioned, Embassy OS is our real value proposition. We sell physical embassies. These are basically Raspberry Pis in a box with a speaker and a little bit of branding, so nothing special there. That was very intentional to use commodity hardware on our part so that people would not need to actually buy a device from us, that they could build one themselves with ease. So our real value add to the world is Embassy OS, which embassies obviously come pre-installed with. And Embassy OS is designed to facilitate the discovery, installation, configuration, and ongoing maintenance of any variety of self-hosted open source software, whether that software is for personal isolated usage or for connecting on a P2P or federated network. Prior to us and using some of our, I'll call them competitors' solutions to a similar problem, you could do this on a Raspberry Pi, right? Anybody could go get a Raspberry Pi and run a bunch of open source software on it. You'd get on the command line, you would, go on to the internet and, download whatever you wanted, clone whatever repository you wanted, go to Docker Hub and get a Docker image and run it on your Pi. And that was very hard and inaccessible to almost everyone on Earth. And so the next logical step was, okay, well, let's say you're a super technical person and I want to run all these open source self-hosted software services on my Raspberry Pi. So I invite you over to my house, and you know the command line. And so you hop on the command line and you install all these things. You go, okay, now I'm going to go to Docker Hub, I'm going to get this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to change your configuration, and I'm going to set up Tor, and I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. And you set it all up. And then you're like, goodbye. And you walk out. And now I have this Raspberry Pi running in my house, and all these things are running. And you even gave me a couple instructions on how to, access these things and use them. And then I'm sort of on my own, right? If something breaks, I'm calling you. If I need to configure one of these services, I'm calling you because I don't know how to get on the command line and configure them. And that's better, right, than the original solution of that I can't do it at all. But it still leaves me wanting for more because I can't do it myself. And that is where Embassy OS is unique amongst anything that has ever existed and anything that currently does exist, is that this is not, Embassy OS does not facilitate or streamline the bootstrapping of a bunch of self-hosted services on your Raspberry Pi. It makes it such that you, anyone, can do this from start to finish and maintain them in perpetuity without calling your technical friend, right? We have created a user interface that is reminiscent of Mac OS, Windows, iOS, Android, right? We've created a user interface that seems familiar, that you would normally use to do client-side software, apps, we call them, except we have made it possible to do it with server-side apps, which is not a simple problem. It is an incredibly complex problem, as any DevOps engineer knows. Downloading, installing, configuring, maintaining server applications that connect over federated and peer-to-peer networks that have dependencies and configuration files and network connectivity, considerations, is usually a very high-paid job at a company. And we have made it possible for a non-technical individual to do at their home on a Raspberry Pi.
Right. And here's something that made me consider, what if there was more connectivity between devices? Did you ever think about making the Embassy OS work as an external device to something like a Raspberry Blitz, or something that's open source and already has Bitcoin and Lightning, but can use these features to integrate something like Sphinx or Mastodon, or applications that may not be supported by the regular nodes?
Could you clarify the question? Are you asking if we have thought about building an integration with something like Raspberry Blitz? Is that?
Like other free open source software, so that people don't really need to run two nodes or something, and they can connect to the device that they already have in their living room or something like that. I know that there are a lot of Umbrel fanboys, and I like Raspberry Blitz for various reasons because it's the most open source of all of them. And I'm not sure, I would love to run, for example, an instance for Mastodon and self-host my own server. But I'm not sure if I would be, willing to run another Bitcoin node that I'm not using.
I see. Yeah. So they are not mutually exclusive, as in with, so they're very, very different animals. Okay. So Raspberry Blitz is essentially it's the scenario that I gave you where your friend comes over and sets everything up, right? It's a convenience function, so to speak, right? Where you get this single piece of software, and then by installing this single piece of software, you actually get a whole suite of software services for free. Because what Raspberry Blitz is doing under the hood is sort of bundling all of these things together and then running a bunch of install scripts. And so it's acting like that friend who comes over and just kind of like bundles it all up for you and then puts it onto your Pi. And then you're sort of on your own. Embassy OS is a completely different concept, right? It is a genuine operating system where you are using a graphical user interface to shop for services that you want to run. And then the operating system uses its own built-in package manager that we designed to make sure that those services have all their dependencies met, are configured properly, and all of this is done through a GUI. There's no command line. So it's very a la carte, right? So what you can do, and what many people are doing today, is they are running their Raspberry Blitz or MyNode or Umbrel or Ronin Dojo to run their full archival Bitcoin node and maybe some Lightning services. And then they're buying an Embassy to run all of their non-Bitcoin things like Mastodon and Bitwarden and Matrix for messaging, etc. And so these two things can run side by side, and you're not actually running two Bitcoin nodes, which could be very heavy on a home network. Because you don't have to do anything with Embassy. You don't have to run Bitcoin if you don't want to. Bitcoin is just one service offered in our marketplace, as are the Lightning services. They don't come pre-installed, they don't come bundled. And in fact, what a lot of people don't realize is that with Embassy, you can actually install, say, LND or C Lightning without installing Bitcoin. And then you can tell LND or C Lightning on your Embassy to connect to the full Bitcoin node running on your Raspberry Blitz. So you could actually use your Raspberry Blitz just to run a full archival Bitcoin node and then use Embassy to run all your Lightning services if you wanted to, right? I'm not sure exactly why somebody would want to do that, but it does sort of highlight how Embassy OS is designed. It is not opinionated at all. You run the things you want to run, you run them how you want to run them, and it's all very, very easy, done through buttons with question marks that explain things and validations so that you can't mess it up, right? So if I installed LND and I wanted to point it to my Bitcoin node running on my Raspberry Blitz, and I tried to put in a value for that, like LND is going to say, okay, where's my Bitcoin node? And you say, all right, I want to point it to my Raspberry Blitz. And I put the number 1234 in that field. Embassy OS is going to be like, that's not a real destination. Sorry, this isn't going to work. So it actually holds your hand as you go through these things.
Okay, that's a useful clarification. And does it work the same with, for example, applications like Sphinx, which relies on the Lightning Network? Can you install Sphinx and point it to some other device?
Absolutely. Yep. So you could run Sphinx on your Embassy and have it using the LND node that's running on your Raspberry Blitz.
I'm actually thinking that sometimes it's a bad idea to have one device do everything, so you don't want to create single points of failure. Mm-hmm. Or maybe that your storage device or your storage HDD or SD card or SSD, whatever that you're using, may not be able to store all of that information. So for example, let's say that you own an internet store which gets lots of orders through BTC Pay server, and you don't really want to change the storage or mix it. So you're going to have one device, maybe one Embassy OS that runs your Bitcoin and Lightning nodes, and another Embassy OS that performs the operation, the single operation of operating BTC Pay server. That's possible, right?
Absolutely. And not only is that possible today in a very kind of segregated way, like you would have two embassies running, and one would be, running these services and another running other services, and each embassy has its own, unique Tor URL where you can go to manage it, each service running on it, etc. But in the future, we're actually have designed Embassy OS, and it's on our roadmap to make it such that if you have multiple embassies, you can tell them about each other, and they will actually act as a personal cluster of servers so that you can manage your entire cluster. So say, for instance, I go to my cluster, Tor address, and I say, I want to install LND. Embassy OS would actually figure out which physical device to install LND on, and then they would all act in concert to back each other up, monitor each other for uptime, internet failures, etc., and then handle load balancing, data redundancy, and all the rest. So this is what scaling looks like at companies, right? You sort of scale your server infrastructure horizontally by putting it in diverse geographic regions and, having them work together. We think individuals should have that same power, but as with everything else, we intend to make it invisible, right? Like you won't even necessarily realize that this is happening unless you want to. And of course, then there's the advanced settings and you can configure it granularly any way you want.
Yeah, that's just so useful. And right now I'm looking at the service roadmap, and you're going to have Electrum personal server, which is always useful for lots of reasons. You can even connect your hardware wallet to it, so that's really great. Even I think most mobile wallets nowadays allow you to connect your own Electrum server, something like Blue Wallet. So there are lots of reasons why you should run Electrum personal server, and also Pi-hole, which is an ad blocking service. I know people who buy a Raspberry Pi, like a Raspberry Pi Zero or something, and they plug it and they only use it as an ad blocker. And I think that's really cool that you're going to be able to combine that otherwise very basic function with something else which makes a lot more sense to keep on 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Raspberry Pis are awesome, okay? And most people get a Raspberry Pi because they have some particular thing that they want to do, right? They want to run their own self-hosted Nextcloud instance or Home Assistant instance, or they want to run a Bitcoin node. That's probably one of the most popular ones these days. And so everyone has a different reason why they want their own personal server. But almost every single one of those people, if you ask them, well, wouldn't you also want to do blah? They'll say, yeah, that might not be my primary thing that I want to do. Of course I would want to do it, but I don't know anything about that. I don't know how to do that. Like I definitely know how to spin up my own Bitcoin node on a Raspberry Pi, but I don't know how to spin up my own Pi-hole node. And so what we are doing is abstracting that solution generally and saying, look, if there is any variety of self-hosted software that you want to run, it'll be a button. That's our goal. And again, the main differentiator between what we are doing and what anyone has done prior is that we're not stopping at, okay, it's up and running. Now you're on your own. It's that we've created an operating system that actually allows you to maintain these self-hosted services in perpetuity, right? It has status monitoring, network uptime monitoring. If there's a problem, Embassy OS will say, hey, we've detected that such and such service is having a problem. Click here to fix it. And then it fixes it for you, right? Like we're making everyone a DevOps engineer, which is outlandish if you know what that means. It is, like I said, normally this is a highly trained technical professional who makes a ton of money to be able to do the things that Embassy OS is allowing anyone to do. And so the vision is very broad. We want everything. We want you to be able to do anything with your computer without compromise, no trust, no central point of failure, not even Start9.
Right, and I was about to ask about the storage options that you have today with the Embassy.
Mm-hmm.
I see that the recommendation is a 128 gigabyte high endurance micro SD card. Can you also connect an external SSD, for example?
This has been probably the main story of the last few months in terms of asks from the community. So we originally launched the Embassy and the DIY guide for building your own, such that everything, the operating system, every service, and all the persistent data are running off of a micro SD card that's plugged into the Pi. This is not a good idea to do forever. Micro SD cards, even high endurance ones, will fail after, a few years, depending on how heavily you're using it, 5, even 10 years maybe. All hardware fails eventually, but like SSDs, for example, have enormously longer lifetimes than a micro SD, and they're way faster, right? So that's another huge perk. So we shipped Embassies like this because we very much believe in the ship and iterate philosophy. Not necessarily the move fast and break things philosophy, because we are dealing with sensitive technology here, where if it fails, you could actually lose data or lose money. So we have taken enormous precautions to make sure that you're not at risk, especially if you're performing backups. But we do recognize that it is not as performant as it should be, and not as robust as it should be. And so it has been a major focus of ours over the last couple of months to move Embassy and Embassy OS in a direction that it can handle external drive support. Now, we probably could have rolled that out in a matter of weeks, taking a naive approach of just saying, okay, they can plug a drive in, and then the data will be stored on that drive, and the operating system will run over here, and that's that. But we're actually using this sort of, quote, hard fork opportunity to execute a massive wish list of improvements to Embassy OS. So the upgrade from O2X, the version 2 series, we'll call it, to the version 3 series that is coming very soon. We are in the final stages of wrapping that up right now, is a massive, massive improvement, which was already a massive improvement on the version 1 series. So this is really our sort of like coming of age story, this version 3 that is preparing to release, hopefully in July, potentially in August. We want to make sure it's ready to go before we ship. It really does take Embassy OS to the next level in terms of speed, reliability, and functionality. It's everything we've wanted. Obviously, there's still a long way to go in terms of new features, but we think we finally have landed on the right architecture and basic approach to this problem that we have now iterated twice. This third iteration is really the one. So it introduces SSD support, to answer your original question. Beginning with 030, you will be able to, not only be able to, but you will be required to, Embassy OS will require a external drive to be plugged in. You'll be able to plug in an SSD or HDD and use it for all your service and volatile data.
Mm-hmm. This was actually a question by BTC Sharks with a Z in the end.
Okay.
Who wanted to know the anticipated release for the SSD support, but I suppose that your answer is that it will be done when it's implemented, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, we there's nothing left to figure out. It's just a matter of doing it, and we have a team of doers. I mean, all we do is code. The entire founding team are developers, and we've hired multiple developers since then. 3/4 of the team are excellent software engineers, and we write code all day, every day. So we're moving very, very quickly, but it is a testament to the size and sophistication of the system that we're building, that it's taking this long. Like, this is not us sitting around twiddling our thumbs or us being incompetent engineers getting it wrong over and over again. We are building something massive that we believe can be the basis of a new paradigm of personal computing for the future, where individuals are running their own servers everywhere on Earth. That, we hoping that this new version of Embassy OS, as well as other projects in the space, are pushing this planet in a direction of non-custodial computing. We think that that is essential to the future. We think that the relationship between humans and computers is a sacred one, if I could use that word, that it is perhaps the most important relationship humans have ever had with a tool, and we are tool-bearing beings, right? Tools are how we are the way we are. It's our unique survival mechanism, is that we can build and use tools, and computers are the most powerful tool we have ever designed, because they are a tool for the mind, and the mind is the thing that imagines and creates the tools in the first place. And so a tool of the mind increases our ability to make other tools, and yada, yada, yada. We don't need to get too deep on the sort of evolutionary and philosophic angle here, but if that tool, the most important tool that you have as a human being, is owned or intermediated by a third party, you really can't be free, right? If everything you do with a computer is permissioned by a company or a government or just another person, you're kind of asking them permission to think. You're kind of asking them permission to use your brain at its maximum capacity. And we just think that that is a huge danger that has emerged over the last couple of decades. And we are out to fix it by making computing in general, personal, private, by default, no trust, no intermediaries. And it's just a super hard problem. It's really hard.
Yeah, and I was about to ask about the licensing. What is the Embassy OS like? Is it free open source software all the way, or are there limits to the ways that you can use it? Like you can see it because it's open source, but you cannot sell it.
Correct. There are limitations. So here's our licensing strategy. And there was a Citadel Dispatch episode with Matt Odell and all the other Node implementations, except for Umbrel, who opted out, where we discussed this at length. So I will not rehash that entire 3-hour conversation, but I will give an overview of sort of our general approach to licensing and why we chose that approach. Embassy OS is licensed under a license that we crafted against the recommendation of many people. We wrote our own license because nothing out there really suited what we wanted from a strategic perspective, which is we wanted Embassy OS to be free, not free as in liberty, but free as in free of cost. We wanted Embassy OS to be free for anyone on Earth to download and use in any way that they saw fit. So under the terms of our license, which is called the Start9 Personal Use License, you can access our source code, audit it, copy it, download it, fork it, change it, update it, redistribute it, anything you want. You can do whatever you want with our source code, including you can compile it and run it for yourself for free. And we have a guide on how someone can do this. The only thing, there's 2 things that we prohibit in our license currently. One is that you cannot distribute the fully compiled code. So the source code, you can do whatever you want with. You can edit it, fork it, change it, and send it to your friends and say, here, this is a better Embassy OS. I've improved it. But you can't compile it and then send them the binary, as in you're distributing a product at that point. You're not distributing what went into the product, which is the source code. You're not distributing the blueprint. You're distributing the house. And so we prohibit that. We say you can't distribute the compiled product. And number 2 is you cannot commercialize the source code or any derivative of the source code for any reason whatsoever. As in you can't take our source code, fork it, change it, and sell the updates. You can give them away, but you can't sell them. So we prohibit the commercialization of our source code in any way, shape, or form, and we prohibit the distribution of the compiled source code. And we chose those limitations for strategic, not philosophic purposes, as in we foresee a future where Embassy OS will be FOSS completely. But things are not the way that you want them to be because you want them to be that way. And you can't always get what you want right out of the gate. We have chosen this because we believe that that decision is what allows the technology to get built, right? So one of the primary arguments that FOSS adherents will argue is that if your code is FOSS, like full MIT, right? GPL, still has limitations, as in you have to, attach the same license, it has to remain open source. So it's still not totally free, right? Like MIT is basically the only totally free license, or no license at all, which I think actually has a default license and therefore it doesn't work. So it's MIT or bust, right? And a lot of the arguments that people will make for having an MIT license or a GPL or whatever is that you will get more community involvement. Your project will get more attention, that you will attract developers to your project because they see profit in it for themselves. They'll be able to fork your code, make it better, distribute it under their own brand, sell it, and basically profit off of their contributions to your work. Or maybe they don't make any changes at all. Maybe they just fork it, call it something else, and sell it. Either way, your project is getting distributed, right? It's like, oh, your software is surviving because you've created this incentive system for other people to want to use it, copy it, distribute it, make money off of it. And so it gets attention. It's like the place to be. And that is a very valid argument. But we are at a position right now where our software is so young, right? It's so, like it already does a lot, but it's not a mature project, right? And it exists largely in the brains of a couple individuals. And that is where it must exist right now. As in, if we had 20 open source developers show up at our doorstep tomorrow and just say, we are here to work, give us code to write, we want to contribute to the project, I would honestly tell them, come back in a couple of months. We are at a position right now where the complexity of what we are building and the immaturity of it are such that it really only can accommodate a couple of people right now working on it because it's iterating so fast. In fact, we had a guy come on, Satoshi Sound, right, is his screen name, and we really hope he sticks around. But he showed up to make some improvements to the user interface of Embassy OS. So he comes in, he forks the code base, he made an improvement, and he puts up a PR. By the time his PR was up, the entire module that he was working in had been refactored, and the code that he had written no longer made any sense at all. As in, we're moving so fast internally with the people inside of Start9 that it's almost impossible for an external contributor to effectively contribute right now. So in other words, one of the main, if not the main, benefit of having your software be FOSS is not important to us right now. It will be in the future. And when that time comes, we will take measures to adjust. As in, we are not beholden in any kind of strict philosophic or ideological sense to having a permissioned license. We will always choose the license that we believe gives the technology we are developing the best opportunity to survive and thrive.
Yeah, that makes sense when you approach development as a company. But I'm going to play the devil's, and in this context, the devil is FOSS advocate, and say that, for example, if your software was entirely open source, then it would incentivize more people to look at the code and potentially break it and help you move into a direction which makes everything more robust and consolidates it. But then again, if you're approaching it as a company, I don't think it makes much sense, as somebody else will not be able to keep up with everything that you're putting out.
Well, let's be clear. The code, so the terminology is a sensitive thing, right? Because people have attached, semantics to meanings, and that's fine. So I won't use the term open source, but I will use the term source available. As I mentioned, our code is right there in broad daylight, and absolutely anyone can view it, audit it, test it for vulnerabilities, fork it, run it themselves, put up PRs to make it better, absolutely anything. There's nothing that prevents somebody, anyone in the community, from testing Embassy OS in any way that they see fit and reporting those vulnerabilities publicly. Like, it's all right there for anyone to see. What you're saying is that they might not be as incentivized to do that as they would be if they could profit from it, right? You're saying that the essential argument of FOSS, I think, is that if your code is FOSS, as in if it's totally free, other people can make money off of it, and that provides incentives. As soon as you say you can't make money off of our code, nobody will contribute. And we've actually not experienced that. As in, we have had multiple open source developers, good ones, enter our project and be like, I want to contribute, I want to add to this. Because they're not there for the money. They're there because they like the project and they want to contribute to it. And yeah, sure, I'm sure some people will be deterred by the inability to commercialize our work. But we don't need them right now, was my main point earlier. It's like there will come a day when Embassy OS needs to just be totally free, as in just it's standalone free, like Bitcoin, just out in the world. Anyone can do whatever they want with it. But today, we need the resources, the investment resources. We need to pay ourselves so that we can continue to build this thing. And so for very strategic, not ideological reasons, we have chosen the licensing that we have chosen. And again, we can do this till we're red in the face or blue in the face or whatever. And we did on the 3-hour Citadel dispatch. And my ultimate answer is it's always up for reevaluation. We will continually reevaluate this and always do whatever we think is going to give the technology the best opportunity to survive.
Vaultoro, and that's VAULT, like a gold vault, and Oro, which is Spanish for gold, is a gold and Bitcoin exchange, which offers instant swaps between hard money to over 31,000 customers from more than 95 countries. Vaultoro has offered Swiss privacy and security since 2015. Furthermore, the gold you purchase is your legal property, secured in your name, so even if something happens to Vaultoro, even liquidators could not touch your gold. If you want to become the custodian of your own gold bars, you can request to have them delivered to you or simply trade them back to Bitcoin on the dip. Register for free in only 30 seconds and start trading only with hard money. Please keep in mind that all trading involves risks. This is not financial advice, and you are responsible for your own decisions. When you are using Wasabi Wallet, your internet connection gets routed through the Tor network by default. This means that you get better privacy while using Bitcoin. Download it today at wasabiwallet.io. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but let me ask you something, because it's very important when you run something that's open source to have somebody to verify it for yourself, but not many people do this. So what do you think is the healthiest approach for the average user who maybe has, let's say, a lot of Bitcoin that they want to put into the device and wants to be sure that the device and the software that's going to be running on it is safe and does exactly what it says it does? Do you think that there is a market for individual and independent auditors?
Absolutely, I do. As you mentioned, very few people in this world are capable or willing, from a time and energy perspective, to audit the code that they run. For example, I have never audited Bitcoin Core, right? I have never gotten into the Bitcoin Core software, looked at the lines of code, and figured out if it's doing what it says it's doing. I am absolutely relying on the assumption and actual, awareness that others have done this and that I trust those people. So ultimately, I am trusting the Bitcoin Core software because I trust the people who trust the software. And that's how it works. And in that sense, your code being open source doesn't even matter, because you could, as a closed source, as in the source code is literally not even visible, hire auditors that people trust to come in and audit your code base and vouch for it, putting their own reputations on the line. However, there's a catch there, which is actually the main, real big driving force that led us to make the source code available in the first place, which is that there is no way to know if you are running the source code unless the source code is visible. As in, Start9, if we were closed source, could have an auditor come in who everyone trusts and show them source code. And they would look at it and they'd review it and they'd say, oh, this looks great. And then we would absolutely just deploy different code onto the embassies. As in, the code that the auditor looked at is not the code that we're actually deploying. And why did we do that? Well, maybe because there was a gag order from the government and they came in and said, oh, you will build a backdoor into your software, but you won't tell anybody. And if any auditors come in, you won't show them that module. And that's that. And so one of the main reasons for making your source code available, again, not FOSS, just open source, right, without the F in front of it, is protection against coercion from government, right? Because if your code is open source viewable, then you can't do malicious things in it. Somebody will see it. You hope, right? You hope that somebody is looking at your code base. But if the government were to come into Start9 and say, here's a gag order, build in a backdoor, we want to see what's happening, I can honestly look them in the face and be like, I can't do that, because if I do that, every single person on earth will see it. It's in broad daylight.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was actually thinking of cases when I think a good example is Max Hillbrand, and he paid someone to look at Taproot while the code was still in the review phase. And I thought that was really useful and really good, even though he didn't pay too much for the audit. It was still something. And I feel like we like to LARP all the time about don't trust, verify, but we don't actually verify. And there are lots of ways through which we can verify. And if we are not technically inclined and capable of doing a proper verification, we should at least have a different branch of independent reviewers who have no incentive to lie to you and cannot get paid by the other side to claim that the code is fine when it's not.
I just thought of something as you were talking there that I will actually state here today, which is that anyone who wants to audit Embassy OS but does not feel personally capable of auditing Embassy OS, first of all, is perfectly welcome to hire an auditor, and the auditor can come in and audit the code and tell them what they think. But I will go further than that and say that Start9 will contribute to that. I'd have to work out the details, but I will put something out, which is an audit fund, that if anyone in the community wants to audit Embassy OS, they are welcome to contribute to a fund that Start9 will match to some degree, either fully or in part, in order to hire auditors that we ourselves do not choose, right? So some sort of community-led auditing fund where, anyone who would like to see Embassy OS code audited can donate, and those funds will be used to hire the consensus of whoever we think should do the audit. Who I would love to come and audit our code, whose foundation I think would be perfect for this, and I would love to put this on her radar, is Sarah Jamie Lewis from OpenPriv.
I can also think of a couple of other people like Peter Todd and also Sergio Lerner.
Okay.
Who is the co-founder of RSK and was one of the early auditors of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I would love this. Obviously, I don't think it would be worthwhile to do on the current code base because 030 is right around the corner. So any audit that's done on 020 would become obsolete overnight, basically. But once 030 is launched, this isn't just for the community. I want this. Start9 will do this regardless. But if it benefits the community as well, then, I think the community should in part choose who does the audit. So that way it is, more less trusted, right? We're not like choosing our own auditor. That's kind of internal, you know? But yeah, I mean, we want to know if there are any vulnerabilities in our system. So we encourage people to find them and report them, but we may need to incentivize that as well. And of course, we're happy to, that sounds like a great expenditure of capital to me.
Oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense to do that. I appreciate it that you have announced it on my podcast, and I would very much like to see where this goes and what happens next. And, you know, when you hear about this OS, which works with something as basic as a Raspberry Pi and anyone can run, it's so good that you don't want to see it fail, you know? You just want this to work. You don't want to see it turn into some sort of Microsoft just because it becomes profitable at some point. Even though I'm not saying you should not make money out of it, but we can find different ways, I guess.
Well, look, our business model is simple, right? And it takes a minute to understand it. Like when you're building open source, whether it's FOSS or just kind of source available, and you're building on the decentralized world, right? Like we have gone out of our way to make it such that you don't have to do business with us to use our technology, right? Like you can get the source code yourself, download it, compile it, buy a Raspberry Pi from the hardware store down the street, and be running a full-blown Embassy OS computer without ever touching Start9 in any way, without ever giving us money. And that's really important to us, that is possible. And not only possible, but we intend to make it easier and easier and easier. In other words, cannibalizing our own business model, right? We are intending to kind of destroy our own ability to sell our primary product. And so, you know, as we went about raising money from investors, and I told them that, they go, well, how am I going to make money? If you're gonna purposely like give your product away for free. And my response was very practical. Rather than theoretical, which is what I just said to you, which is that it doesn't matter if we give it away for free. People will still buy it because the free route is always one click more than the non-free route. And when you're dealing with the masses, like we are trying to do, we're not a niche product, right? We don't want to be a niche product. Let me put it that way. So let's say we're a niche product catering to technical individuals, like most of the other nodes, for example, right? They are Bitcoin products catering to Bitcoin, the more, I'll call it the more devoted of the Bitcoin community. These are people who believe the don't trust verify, believe in individual sovereignty over your computing, and they're willing to put in some time and energy in most cases to do it. We intend to sell to grandma, and grandma is never going to touch the command line, even if it's to copy paste a single string in. She still won't do it. They want something that they can plug into the wall and push a button. And so we know that even if we give it away for free on the command line, that most people, our target market eventually, will still buy the device or buy the operating system. And not only that, but we have alternative ways of making money. Obviously, not data collection and ad revenue and stuff like that. That's impossible. We've literally designed the system to make that impossible. But there are interesting ways to monetize community and membership that are totally optional, right? That don't in any way, they're in no way required for the function of the device. As in your Embassy will always work, and no forced updates, etc. But if you are a premium member, as in you pay X amount per year, you get perks. Maybe it's meetups in a city. Maybe it's free admission to our annual conference. Maybe it's a t-shirt every year. You get the latest t-shirt, blah, 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 blah. Like you can, basically people who believe in your project and who believe in your vision of the future and want to complement or reward your efforts, we have found that most people, it's not a donation because you're still delivering something in return, but it's kind of with a wink. It's like everyone knows that the annual t-shirt is not really why you're giving us this money. You're giving us this money because you believe in the project, and the t-shirt is a token of your contribution. It is a way for you to show others and remind yourself that you contributed. And so we will create these sort of membership-based, totally optional, help the project survive type of revenue models. We will continue to sell Embassy OS as downloadable software. We will continue to sell pre-built embassies as plug-and-play personal servers. And lastly, we intend to participate in the emerging decentralized financial world, right? Like what's happening on Bitcoin and Lightning is nothing short of a total re-architecting of Earth's financial system. And when who was it? Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. I don't know if you've read that or whatever. He said there are 2 times in life to make a fortune. One fast and one slow. Slow in the rise of an empire and fast in its collapse. And we are witnessing the collapse of an empire right now. The global financial system is collapsing. And there are fortunes to be made in the collapse of empires. Money will be laying all over the streets. And if you understand what's coming next, if you understand what the new system will be, the replacement, during that transition, you can profit wildly. And I don't mean that in a negative or positive sense. It's just a fact. It's just true. And so we intend very much as being both at the end and the beginning of these 2 systems, because this entire decentralized global financial system is going to need hardware. It's not just pies, right? It needs an operating system. Like take for example, if everyone on Earth is connecting to the same Bitcoin node, right? As in everyone's just running wallets that all connect to a centralized Bitcoin node, we have done nothing. We have completely reinvented the current system, called it something else, and we're back to where we started. If we are to win the day here, if the future of planet Earth, especially its financial system, is to be open and decentralized, available to all without restriction, everyone has to be running their own instance of these software services, right? Because if you're trusting everyone, now, look, of course you can Uncle Jim, right? Like I could run a Bitcoin node for my family, but that's not a threat to the system. It's when I run a Bitcoin node for my neighborhood that it starts to be like, maybe, okay? But now I'm running a Bitcoin node for my state. Now it's like, okay, we're back in the danger zone. So the degree to which it is easy to run these things on your own is the degree to which individuals will run them. And so our goal is to make running self-hosted, open-sourced software services, especially the ones that run on peer-to-peer federated networks, easy for grandma. Because if we do that, then everyone will run them. And if everyone runs them, then we have a chance at winning this. And so we, as Start9, are in this very interesting position because we're simultaneously providing what we think is kind of the backbone of this, like the operating system that is going to make it so that grandma can run Bitcoin and Lightning and Pi-hole and Matrix and all the rest, which gives us this really interesting touch point with the consumer, with the person who's buying these devices. So I'll give you an example that I think will illuminate the overall strategy. When somebody buys an Embassy today and they set up their Bitcoin node and then they set up their Lightning node, Embassy OS, not Embassy OS, the instructions for LND that we have included with LND offer the user options, but there's a recommendation. There's a default, right? We say, okay, now that you have LND running on your own server, congratulations, it's time to get some liquidity. Let's get you some outbound liquidity. Let's get you some inbound liquidity so that you can actually start using this thing. Well, what is our recommendation? Our recommendation is going to be, all right, well, open a channel with Start9 and then contact so-and-so or use this, new script that we wrote, and Start9 will reciprocate and open a channel with you and get you some inbound liquidity, or we'll send you an invoice for a t-shirt and you can buy it and immediately get inbound liquidity that way. In other words, we are using our positioning as the operating system and primary tool for running these services in order to promote our own participation in the layer 2 and 3 networks. Obviously, we can't have a monopoly there because these are open networks. We are just one node of many that you could connect to. But we also know that most people will sort of take the recommended route. They will take the defaults. And so we have to be careful to never go too far with this and like tip the road, tip over to like making it pretending like this is the only way to do it. Like we need to be very clear in our messaging that, hey, user, you have tons and tons of options, but you already bought an Embassy, so clearly you like Start9. If you'd like to continue doing business with us on Bitcoin's Lightning Network, you can connect to our channel here. So we actually believe that our primary sources of revenue and profit as a company will come from our optional participation in these higher layer networks. So I shouldn't say optional, it's a non-compulsory, right? Like we cannot force any of our users to do business with us on Lightning, but we can absolutely make it easy for them. And we're already starting to see dividends in this. We are running a pretty high-powered Lightning node and already starting to make money off of it.
Oh yeah, I did try to connect your Lightning node.
We rejected you, didn't we?
Exactly. I suppose that the amount that you need to use for opening a channel is 0.0.1 Bitcoin. So that's 1 million Satoshis or 10,000 bits, which was a bit on the large side for me in terms of channels. Usually I open smaller ones, but that's fine. Someday I'm gonna save a lot of money and open a channel with Start9, just because I know that there's gonna be a lot of action there and I can route some transactions potentially. But you have mentioned a quote from Gone with the Wind, and I haven't read the book, but I've watched the film before it got canceled and it's no longer available on HBO and Netflix.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting with the fall of an empire and all of that. And I actually want to extend the conversation, but before that, I want to get to the comments that I have received on Twitter.
I want to clarify one thing real quick, which
Sure.
is that Start9's acceptance policy for new channels is of any size, as in you can open a channel with us of any size, but only if it's a private channel. Our node will reject your channel request if you try to open a small public channel, because small public channels actually hurt us in our network rankings. So if you want to open a channel with us, you can. It just needs to be private.
Oh yeah, but private means that you can transact with your peer with whom you have connected, but nobody else. And nobody else on the network can see it.
No, sorry, that's not true. So you can pay. So if you open a private channel with Start9, you can pay anyone on the network through us, and anyone on the network can pay you. You simply won't be able to route payments, as in you, if you open a private channel with us, we won't be able to route payments from somebody else through you to somebody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you
So
clarified
you are
a lot better than me.
Yeah, you are connected to the network, but the network cannot connect through you.
Yeah. It's always, it's not easy to explain how this works.
Oh, it's a totally new, Lightning is a serious piece of technology. In fact, we are hosting a meetup in Denver on July 20th that will be filmed, where Keegan, who is head of our Bitcoin and Lightning operations at Start9, and he is an expert, and I don't use that term lightly. Keegan understands this better than almost anyone, probably not the best, but he's up there and rising quickly. We'll be giving a introduction to Lightning 20-minute presentation where the overarching purpose is to take somebody from 0 to understanding, not only how it works, but how they themselves can become a routing node and participate and make money in a 20-minute presentation. So it could be worth checking in on for your audience.
Yeah. So when is that meetup going to take place, just in case somebody listening is interested?
It's on July 20th. Don't quote me on this, probably around 6 p.m. Mountain Time in the US. I will post links to the stream in the lead up to the meetup on Twitter and on our Telegram channel.
So it can also be watched online.
Yes. I don't know if it's going to be live streamed, but we are definitely going to record it and post it immediately. So it would be nice to live stream it, but I have to clarify with the co-host of the meetup if they want to do that or not.
Hey, psst. Hey, what's your plan for the next Bitcoin top? Unless you need the money to purchase something, you probably should not touch infinitely inflationary fiat. Check out Vaultoro and figure out to which extent hard money like gold and silver can help you preserve your purchasing power. You will be able to get back into Bitcoin as soon as the price hits a new bottom, and you will not be subjected to the arbitrary inflation-driven volatility of fiat or fiat-backed coins. Obviously, this is not financial advice, and you should understand that all trading involves risks. Wasabi Wallet connects to your full Bitcoin node, and if you're not running one, it downloads block filters anonymously via Tor. In either case, you're getting excellent privacy. Download the software today at wasabiwallet.io. Yeah, that's fine. And if somebody doesn't want to reveal their face, you can do some edits in post-processing or something. But anyway, let me get to the questions from the audience, because Armand de Parman also has some sort of consultancy website. Says that when he tried to run his, MyNode on Tor, he had to purchase a VPS service to be able to also route BTC Pay server and other services and not reveal his IP address. And does Start9 offer with the Embassy OS a cheaper or a free option, one for which you do not have to pay when you use BTC Pay server to hide your real IP address?
So that is a very surprising statement to me. I cannot and will not comment on MyNode's infrastructure choices or even the accuracy of that statement. But let me answer as bluntly as I can. No. If Start9 was in a position to charge you such that your services would work, we would be Microsoft. We would be Apple. When you run Embassy OS, whether you compiled from source and put it on your own Raspberry Pi, or whether you went the full convenience route and bought the device from us and plugged it into the wall, we are completely out of the loop. Everything on your Embassy will work and will work forever. There is no way for us to know if you've even plugged it in, let alone if you're using it. And there is no way for us to stop you from using it under any circumstances whatsoever. Everything is self-contained, independent, totally sovereign, accessible from anywhere in the world over Tor. We are out of the loop. Unless you contact support and want help, and then we might, you might need to bring us into the loop and tell us what's going on so that we can help you. But we have no insight into what you're doing on your device or if you've even used it.
Oh yeah, but this was specific to services like BTC Pay.
No. As
this guy had to pay 15 Australian dollars a month for a VPS to be able to enjoy anonymity.
No. So BTC Pay is on the Embassy. You click a button and it's running, and then it will automatically link up to either LND or C Lightning on your Embassy, whichever one you want it to use. It will automatically use your Bitcoin Core node for on-chain transactions. All those connections are enabled over Tor. or on the VLAN of your home network. As in, I could go to the other side of the world and talk to the BTC Pay server running on my embassy on the other side of the world by visiting a Tor v3 hidden service URL from any Tor-enabled browser. There is no IP leakage. There is no exit node involvement whatsoever on the Tor network. Not only can I use my server from the other side of the world with impunity, as in nobody could stop me, but nobody even knows that the thing is running, because when you install something on your embassy, it gets hosted as its own brand new, newly created Tor v3 hidden service that you can access at its .onion URL. Tor v3 hidden services are just public keys derived from private keys that are created on your embassy. And so nobody even knows that this website exists, let alone that you're using it. It's invisible. It does not exist. It's not even broadcast on the Tor network. And it's a public key, so nobody could ever guess it or brute force it. It is as private as you can get given the current state of technology in this world, as far as we are aware.
I also have this issue with, okay, so I'm looking at my Raspberry Blitz right now. And if I want to enable reachability with a normal browser from the ClearNet, so if I want to have connectivity between ClearNet and Tor, then I have to pay a subscription to an IP to Tor bridge, which is a subscription service.
So we have what we call our ClearNet story, and it's not in 2022. It's not in 2021. It'll come in 2022. It's on the roadmap. So currently, there are two ways for you to communicate with your embassy. So you set the thing up, you push a couple buttons, it's all very easy, and you're done, okay? Now you want to use it. So if you're in your home, as in if you are connected to the same network as your embassy, like the same Wi-Fi network, your embassy is connected to your home Wi-Fi, and your phone is also connected to your home Wi-Fi, then you can communicate with your embassy on the local area network of your home, which is awesome because it's really fast, right? There's no Tor involved. There's nothing involved. You are talking to a hardware device connected on your home network directly, and it's all done over HTTPS, as in your embassy is its own certificate authority, and then you can trust that certificate on your phone or computer so that even somebody who's connected to your home network cannot sniff the traffic. So when you're home, you talk to your embassy over the LAN on an encrypted line. Then when you leave the home, you talk to your embassy also on an encrypted line, but this time using its Tor v3 hidden service. So currently your embassy makes itself available, as do all of the services on the embassy, both on your local area network of your home using SSL and on the Tor network using Tor v3. Next year, in 2022, we will introduce ClearNet support such that if you own a domain like, vlad.com, and you want your embassy to serve itself and make itself available on embassy.vlad.com, then you will be able to do that. As in, if you really want to use ClearNet, again, using HTTPS, you'll be able to. But we didn't prioritize that because the LAN connectivity when you're home and the Tor connectivity when you're gone created a adequate story, as in you can always reach your device. It's just not as fast as you would like it to be when you're not home because Tor is notoriously slow, right? So people who want to use ClearNet to connect to their embassy at their own personal domain will be able to, but keep in mind that involves some centralized parties, not Start9. We won't in any way be involved in that, but whoever your domain registrar will be.
Yeah, so you're telling me that by next year you're going to have a free solution to this issue of working with ClearNet, because obviously you want to get payments from anyone regardless if they're on Tor or they're using HTTP or HTTPS. And right now, the workaround is that you pay a subscription service.
So yes, we will. It will be free from Start9's point of view. Obviously, you'll still need to like buy your domain name from your registrar. So, but that has nothing to do with us. Embassy OS will make it such that you can connect to your embassy from anywhere using a unique ClearNet domain, which would allow you, for instance, to host a BTC Pay server e-commerce site on a normal .com domain rather than on a public key.onion domain.
That makes a lot of sense. And since we have spoken so much about software, let's get to hardware, because I think that's also a fascinating rabbit hole. And I find it really useful, the fact that you have decided to use the Raspberry Pi as the computer which operates all of this ecosystem. And I recently wrote an article about reasons why you should run your node on a Raspberry Pi, and I think it's really great, but on the other hand, it's not really open source, so you can't really build your own from parts. I suppose that there are some tutorials, but you're gonna run into some sort of compatibility issues, and it's ARM, so it has integrated circuits that you most likely will not be able to replicate even if you have expensive gears. And if you go to that length, you're gonna have production costs which far exceed the cost of one Raspberry Pi. But at the same time, I see that there is a trend to adopt and produce machines that are based on the RISC-V specifications. And that's going to be truly a game changer, as it's really open source, it's auditable, everything can be built by yourself if you have the means for it. And I suppose that also takes out some skepticism or cautiousness about NSA backdoors and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, hardware security and supply chain security are important considerations, right? And that's actually the reason that we chose the Raspberry Pi, was because those supply chains are trusted. Most uses of the Raspberry Pi prior to Bitcoin, I should say, were like children learning how to use a computer, right? Like they're tinkering, hobbyists and stuff like that. I don't think anybody is doubting the Raspberry Pi Foundation's hardware, distribution channels. I'm sure that there have been plenty of audits done on randomly selected Pis to see if they're not only being sold as advertised, but if there's any kind of tampering, etc. Like, we chose what we believed to be the most widely available, widely trusted product for our SBC. We also recognize that being reliant on or dependent on a single SBC for the functioning of Embassy OS is a very bad move, because if Pis ever become in short supply or their supply chains become compromised and can no longer be trusted, then Embassy OS is useless because it can only run on a Pi currently. So we are redesigning Embassy OS as part of the 0.3.0 release. So 0.2.0, our version 2 series, was Embassy OS was a fork of Raspbian, not even Raspberry Pi OS, but Raspbian, which is a sort of skinnied down version of Raspberry Pi OS, which is why we chose it, because we didn't want all the bulk of Raspberry Pi OS, which is itself a Linux distro. And therefore, it really was only going to work on a Raspberry Pi. The 0.3.0 series that's coming out soon is an Ubuntu distro. So it is not based on Raspberry Pi OS or Raspbian. It is a much more broadly usable operating system as the kernel, what we're forking. And so we hope to be able to make Embassy OS run on really, any variety of existing hardware. Obviously, those will be different builds and different binaries, whatever. But like We want people to be able to repurpose their old MacBook or, a Rock 64 SBC or something like that to run Embassy OS.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look into hardware, and it's easy to fall down that rabbit hole because nowadays there are so many very capable machines that you can buy for low prices. And you have mentioned the Pine 64. Some people prefer that to the Raspberry Pi, but it's not as widely available and it's not as popular. And when you consider building software, you have to also think about network effects. And all of those machines are actually ARM based. They're very hard to produce by yourself, and it's not really worth the cost.
Yeah, I agree. This is, I'm personally, I'm an application developer. My experience is in app development, full stack, right? I can do server-side software, client-side software. I am not formally educated in computer science, and I know almost nothing about hardware. So I know what I know and I know what I don't know. That expertise lies with the McClelland brothers, Keegan and Aiden, who are my partners and co-founders of Start9. They know more than I could ever dream to know about how computers work, at the fundamental level, all the way up to the application layer. And so I defer very largely to them when it comes to low-level operating system design and hardware interfacing. Aiden, in particular, has been leading the effort on the redesign of Embassy OS 030, which again is our sort of like coming-of-age story. It's really the thing. It's all Aiden. Aiden designed it. He wrote most of the code for it. I did a lot of the front-end code for this release. So everything you see on the screen will be me. That's the easy stuff. Everything that's happening under the hood is Aiden. And even Aiden designed what you see on the screen. I just did a lot of the code. But he would be the one to ask about, how to build Embassy OS such that it is multi-hardware compatible, easy to build from source, and resilient and redundant in every way.
Mm-hmm. There's that old Steve Jobs quote that if you want to build good software, you have to also build your own hardware. And
I hope
I'm
that's
not
not
sure
true.
if we are to that point yet, but I see a lot of work with RISC-V hardware, and I have great expectations that it will pick up. Right now, it's just too expensive for the average person. The Raspberry Pi is so convenient. You pay about $50 for one computer, and all you have to do for extra expenses is get a power supply and a case to keep it cool and well ventilated, and some sort of storage, and that's it. You're all set. You connect it to the internet. You can also get a screen if you want, but you can access it by typing the IP address and the port in your browser if you're using the same internet connection, and that pretty much solves it.
Yeah, that's why we chose it. It was expedient. It's reliable. It's a great computer. It's a very good hardware device. And I don't think the quote from Jobs is correct anymore. It might have been at the time. I think these things are cyclical. I think whether the value that a company is producing relies in its innovation in hardware or its innovation in software depends on these cyclical development cycles of hardware and software, as in both become commoditized in each cycle, right? So take smartphones. When the iPhone came out, and then the iPhone 4, which was really the breakthrough, nothing like that had ever existed before, right? It was a completely new piece of hardware. It was a massive innovation, and it took years to refine and evolve that innovation until today. I don't think there's been a serious innovation in smartphone hardware in, 7, 8 years. I mean, what are they? Every single one just has a better camera than the previous one, right? There's like these super minor improvements that are taking place from one iteration to the next, but there's no real innovations anymore. There's no real revolutions in hardware taking place right now until the next one. But in the meantime, what has happened is the hardware has become extremely commoditized, right? Because everyone has had time to catch up, right? Like Apple innovated, capitalized off of their first mover advantage, and then it distributed to everyone till now you can go out and buy hardware smartphones that are blank, open shells that you could install an OS on fairly cheaply. Like everything's really cheap. Smartphones are dirt cheap now. And so, at Start9, we look at that and we go, okay, so hardware is not what the world needs right now. The world has a ton of hardware. Computers are awesome. Storage is cheap. Smartphones are commoditized. The problem is that they're all running crappy software. I don't mean crappy as in bad user experiences. They're wonderful user experiences. I mean crappy as in anti-liberty. Like we are running software on these computers that are causing serious problems with society. And so we look at that landscape and we go, let's find the most reliable, available, commoditized, boring hardware we can possibly find and make some radical innovations to the software. And sure, someday that cycle will end. The software will become commoditized. It is open source. Others will copy it. It'll become totally boring. And then somebody will come out with some new device called the Matrix, where you put on, you push a button and you're in a virtual world and it's totally new hardware. And it's like, then we have to start the cycle all over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Plus, I've had this conversation with Slush, the creator of Slushpool and also the co-founder of Trezor, and he told me that it's impossible for hardware to keep up with software. And the innovation all the time comes from software, and hardware tends to be much more stagnant, and it takes time for it to really change. And even if it evolves very fast, you can't ask people to buy a new piece of hardware all the time to keep up. So even if it was completely possible for you to release hardware and software at the same time, it's not practical. So you have to always improve the software if you want to remain competitive.
Golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin. Voltoro.
Wasabi Wallet's innovative coin joins will make your bitcoins more fungible. So if you accumulate more than 0.1 BTC, you can mix it with other users to remove all traces about their whereabouts. So it's like putting multiple fingerprints on your dollar bills, and it becomes impossible to determine the last few owners of the money. Download Wasabi Wallet today and start coin joining. So, as far as I know, there was Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, who envisioned a world in which everyone would be their own server. And next to your computer, you would have another device that would store all the information that you're sharing on the internet. And this was a very good idea. With this type of approach, I suppose that the internet would have been a lot more decentralized, but I suppose that also the adoption would have been slower. And the fact that we ended up relying on cloud services and all of these third parties that, I was about to say self-host, but they host content for yourself so that it becomes easier to use the network. I mean, I suppose there were pluses in terms of adoption, but it ended up scaling very poorly. And nowadays we rely too much on Amazon and Google and Microsoft and all of these companies that offer web hosting. So I suppose that now that we have Bitcoin and we have sovereign money, this is our chance to actually allow the network to expand organically and on the basis of low power devices that anyone can run at home. And it's actually very inexpensive and affordable for almost everyone around the world to become a validator in the network. And with Start9, you can do more, like have your own social network that you're running and all of that stuff. So do you ever think about taking the internet back to its original intentions?
I think that's all we think about. That is our essential objective. I'm less focused on original intentions, right? The fact that our vision of a future where humans and computers have, our vision of the relationship that humans and computers have, the fact that it aligns with the original vision of the internet is coincidental, right? Like, I think the original vision was correct. And we just want to make that a reality, not because it was the original vision. The original vision could have been wrong, and we'd still be trying to do what we're doing because we think it's right. And you're right that we have created a monster, right? But for all the right reasons, right? There was no malicious intent, I don't think. I think that, the advent of personal computers is a milestone in human history. It was the best, by orders of magnitude, best tool humans had ever invented for the brain to complement the power of the brain, supplement it, make it more powerful. And, they were very personal devices. You got a computer and you interfaced with it directly. It was a very siloed personal experience. That's why they were known as personal computers. You had your IBM sitting in your home in the 70s and then your Windows machine, and you were doing word processing and playing solitaire and taking notes and all that. And it was all extremely personal and private. It belonged to you. The computer was your servant and complement to your brain. And then, the internet came along and was like, well, you're using this cool tool. You can also use it to interact with others who are using these tools on a network. And all you have to do to join this network is pop open your, DOS terminal and plug in a bunch of commands and fight with it for 16 days, and eventually you'll be chatting with somebody at the university down the street. And absolutely nobody could or would do that except for a few geeks. And what those geeks realized very quickly is that everyone wants to be able to do this, but it's super hard to do. So why don't we do it for them and sell it as a product? And that is the essence of business, right? There's nothing wrong with that thinking. It's not like they were sitting around twiddling their thumbs saying, and then 20 years from now, we'll have all their data. And it was like, no, people want to use this thing that they can't use. So we're going to invent a service/product and make it easy to use, and we'll charge for it. And so they created a business in a free market, relatively free market system. They created a business, and sure enough, people started paying for their product. And then from there, it's just follow the incentives, right? All you have to do from that moment forward is just follow the very natural, logical incentives, and you arrive at the system that we have today, which is this completely centralized, oligarchic, dogmatic, custodial model of computing, where basically everyone is just using remote controls for one giant central computer that is, gatekeeping and tracking and charging and rent seeking for all your activities. And so what we did was we took the most powerful tool that humanity has ever invented for its own prosperity, and we rented it. We turned it into a rent model, essentially disempowering individuals, or at least making the benefits of this tool permissioned, right, available at the grace or mercy of a government ultimately, because they take over the companies or vice versa or whatever. And so how do we fix the problem? Well, nothing about computer science has changed, as in it is still perfectly possible for anyone on Earth to participate in these open, peer-to-peer, federated, decentralized networks. But what hadn't changed is the ease of doing it, right? Like command lines have come a long way. There are, code repositories online like GitHub and apt where you can download source code and fully, compiled binaries. There's things like Docker that make running, whole sets of dependencies together, very easy and isolated from the rest of the operating system. And so it's gotten a little better. Like there are tools that have come along that have made self-hosting, for lack of a more powerful term, easier, but still nothing close to the ease of using your remote control to access, Facebook or Amazon's central server. And so the battleground is convenience and cost, right? Cost and convenience. And so we don't sit there and look at the existing paradigm and say, we need more laws. We need more regulation, right? We've got to stop Facebook and Twitter and their censoring of people because they're private companies and for some reason they can't censor, which I've never understood that argument because, I think most people who are making that argument are saying, well, these aren't really private companies. They're sort of acknowledging the de facto observation that, while they are, quote, a private company, they are actually so in bed with regulators and they're so, big that they are basically a public utility and therefore censoring anybody is actual censorship and not just a private company deciding what the rules of their platform are. We do not advocate for, government or anything that has a monopoly on force to come in and like make companies be better with your privacy, better with your data, or engage in less censorship practices. Because we understand that by doing that, all you're doing is moving the ability to censor and gatekeep and rent seek from the private company to the government. And so power still funnels upward, right? It's still ultimately the end of the road of that entire story is, totalitarianism. It's dictatorship is the end of the road. And so we don't advocate for that because I don't want to see things go further in that direction. I'd rather let Twitter continue its, crappy practices of promoting or censoring various things. Because better to have a dictator Twitter, than a dictator. At least in my mind, right? I don't speak for my whole team or anybody, but I, think that is a lesser issue at the moment. Our solution is to use technology, and very much in line with Sovereign Individual, which was probably the most practically influential book I've ever read in terms of its effect on my decisions in this world, to use technology to alter the course of politics, right? So rather than using politics to dictate how products and technologies are used, you invent new products and technologies that change the incentives of the system. So we recognized, and this is where Start9 comes into play, that if we were ever going to stop the centralized, oligarchic, dogmatic, totalitarian internet that we've created, this monster that came about for the sake of convenience, that we would need to create an equally cheap and convenient alternative. That's really the only way, because if you rely on any other mechanism, all you're doing is shifting where power resides, invariably in the direction of more and more centralization. So we set out to build an equally convenient, equally cheap alternative to not just the internet, but to the entire computing model of planet Earth. Like, how do humans and computers interact with one another? And then how do computers interact with other computers? And thank God we had this wonderful example in Bitcoin. Bitcoin demonstrated the essential recipe and principles that are needed to build a non-custodial, truly decentralized network. And it just so happens, because everything's based on computers, that the same principles and strategies that Bitcoin exemplifies can be used for computing in general. That you can create a decentralized internet using the same model as Bitcoin. And in fact, Bitcoin needs a decentralized internet for its own survival. Because if, like I said earlier, if you're running a, quote, decentralized network, but there's only one node and everyone is connecting to that node, it's actually not a decentralized network. The network is only as decentralized as individual participants essentially cast their vote, right? Or participate in the network, run a node, and use that node. Not just run it in the background, but use it to validate transactions and to enforce consensus rules. And so what was needed, what Bitcoin needs, and what humanity needs, right? So humanity needs Bitcoin. And Bitcoin needs a platform. It needs an internet that is not centrally controlled. And so that's what we set out to build, was to give Bitcoin a home, not a centralized home, but a network, a space that it can exist in. And we're not the only ones, right? All the other node implementations are setting out, albeit in a slightly more kind of focused way. I shouldn't have said focused, but in a slightly more narrow way, are setting out to make Bitcoin, to keep Bitcoin decentralized by making it easy to run a node and to run layer 2 and layer 3 services that use that node, that actually use the consensus validation aspect of your node. We are just a bit, I think, more ambitious. We are setting out to make what Bitcoin did and to give Bitcoin a home available for social networking, group and private messaging, personal data storage and sharing, everything that you can imagine that you do with your computer today. There is no fundamental reason why you can't do the exact same thing in a totally non-custodial, decentralized way. There's no fundamental limitation. Everything that can be done centrally can be done decentrally. But the infrastructure to facilitate that, right? The infrastructure to do that exists and has always existed since the beginning of the internet. It has always been possible to do everything in a totally decentralized way. I'll save with one exception, which is consensus, which is really Bitcoin's breakthrough. That was not invented yet. There was no software service that could garner decentralized consensus prior to Bitcoin. But everything else, except for money, basically, could have been done in a decentralized way. And the only reason that it wasn't, the only reason that the centralized way won the day and has come to dominate this planet, is because it afforded better business models. So you could make a ton of money by doing it that way. And so people did it that way. And so that's what got built, right? We built Apple and Google because the people who founded those companies saw a way to make a fortune. And if they had built decentralized systems, decentralized computing infrastructure, they couldn't. And that is the essential drawback, or what is holding back the decentralization of this world, is viable, reliable, sustainable business models where it's almost an oxymoron trying to create a business that is irrelevant to its own business, right? And if you are relevant, then you're no different than Apple or Google. And if you're irrelevant, then how do you make money? And if you can't make money, then it's never going to get built because nobody will work for free forever.
Yeah, there's so many incentives at play. But it's really good that I suppose that this started with the scaling debate of Bitcoin when we decided that we want to keep the block size small and build layers on top. I think that was one of the key moments which led to basically this idea that everyone should be sovereign. I don't recall before the US UASF movement, I don't recall any kind of mobilization or mass, action to tell people that they should be running their own nodes and choose the software that they're running. So I suppose that maybe this was an indirect effect of wanting to activate SegWit and the miners not doing it on time. But this was just incredible, and I think that the implications for the future are really great. I really look forward to see what's going to get built on top of Bitcoin. I look into side chains, I look into what happens with the Lightning Network. And I don't know, did you have this idea about Start9 Labs before we had this scaling debate in Bitcoin?
No, and it didn't come about during the scaling debate either. The scaling debate was part of canon at that time. It was part of our history. And so as my partners and I were conceiving of Start9, that definitely was part of the conversation. It was this decentralization at all costs. You must... If you build something where you are central to it and the thing is important, then you're rebuilding the same world, that we need to keep the system decentralized. And in the case of the internet, we actually need to build a decentralized system because it has become quite centralized. But the primitives are still there for decentralization. And so we set out to take that on, which is not a small task, right? It was a very bold, call it stupid endeavor. We'll see how it goes. But we felt somebody had to take it on. And then we immediately were faced with this question of like, whoa, wait a second. Okay, so we're going to try to build a decentralized computing model for the average person such that they can do all their computing, including Bitcoin, without third parties. And that this is necessary for the maintenance of Bitcoin's decentralization and for the ultimate decentralization of all digital infrastructure and hopefully with it a more free and prosperous world. And we were immediately faced with this challenge of, well, how do we fund it? How do we build this and eat at the same time? You see, Bitcoin was very unique amongst almost anything that has ever existed, in that when you're inventing a system, a decentralized system of money, money is built in, right? So it's like building Bitcoin inherently makes you money because you're adding value to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has its own built-in token, and so the token goes up in value. And so you're essentially an equity holder. If you were an early developer in Bitcoin and you're mining some or you're buying it for nothing, then you're essentially buying equity. Equity is the wrong word. You're buying a representation of the value of the network and then building the network and building your own value. And because it's liquid from day one, there's no lockup period, there's no nothing. So you can literally eat and survive simply by contributing to the project. And that's why Bitcoin got so much traction, is because the incentives were perfectly aligned for people to contribute to it, which is also why there are so many shitcoin projects, right? And I don't use that term to mean anything that's not Bitcoin. I mean actual scams, like things where people are creating networks just because they recognized that you could copy Bitcoin, right? Everything except the real value and create this almost like mockery of this like shell of it that to somebody who doesn't know the difference would then feel like they were investing in something and buy it, and then it goes up, and then you can make a bunch of money without actually adding any real value. But we weren't going to do that. We weren't, we actually sat down and had a serious conversation at one point about like, all right, well, we need a way to fund the projects. We need a way to make money. And we absolutely do not believe that we will be able to get the kind of speed and traction under our belts from donations alone. We just flat out believed that we could not do this as a charitable organization. We did not think that we would be able to garner enough investment to fuel development at a pace that we needed to move at. And so we were like, all right, we need to run a business. And not only do we need to fund the project, but we would like to make a lot of money, right? That's no secret. Like, I want to make a ton of money. I want to make it honestly by delivering a great product to as many people as possible, but I want to make a ton of money. And so we set out to not only build something we thought was good and needed in the world, but we set out to build it in a way that we would actually reap the benefits of our creation. And we thought for a minute about how we could follow Bitcoin's lead and basically have our own money as part of the system. And it didn't take us long because we had been around for a few years and understood these things. And it didn't take us long at all to completely dismiss the idea, because we were like, there's no reason for it. There's no need of an in-protocol currency. We're building an operating system for running self-hosted software. If we tried to make the operation of that system dependent on something like gas, like it needs some kind of a token to function and blah, I mean, it would just be a scam because it's not there. We'd be trying to inject that for the sole purpose of funding the project and gaining wealth at the expense of the quality of the project itself. Bitcoin did not have that trade-off. Bitcoin's in-house currency is what made the project successful and usable and necessary. It was necessary. Without a token, there's no Bitcoin. There's no such thing as a decentralized consensus machine without a reward for the people performing the validation, right? We didn't have that same need, and so we couldn't do the token. So then the question immediately was just like, well, how do we make money? And, we kind of talked about this earlier. Ultimately, it wraps all the way back around to just sheer convenience, community. It's these very like we're a service provider more than a product provider almost. It's like, everything we are doing, you can do without us. Everything we're selling you, you can do without buying it from us. But if you choose to buy it from us, not only are you contributing to the product, but it's easier, you get support, you're part of the team, you get community. So, and then we really started to believe this. Like, we really started to believe that is not only a viable business model, it's not contributions, right? It's not charity. You are selling value for value. But we think it could be a huge business. Like, we think that the incentive to buy rather than download for free is not huge, but it's big enough, as long as the price stays reasonable, that 95% of people will buy rather than take it for free.
It makes a lot of sense. And I know that when you first start with something and you have this very good idea and you want to keep on doing it, it's very hard to sustain it financially. And almost nobody really believes in your work. Like, good ideas come from a dime a dozen. So it's actually consistency that gets noticed. And you have to work by yourself for some time until people notice the kind of work that you're doing and see the value in it. But I was happy to see Eric Voorhees. He was on the podcast the previous season and he spoke about hardware wallets. But I was happy to see when he tweeted that he invests in Start9 Labs for ideological reasons, because he believes that we should have this type of decentralized computing where you can self-host all of your applications. And I thought that was really cool, to get that kind of support and funding.
Yeah, we are very happy to have Eric's involvement. He is a controversial and, in my personal opinion, extremely misunderstood character. As I've gotten to know Eric more and more, I have come to respect him more and more. Eric is remarkably consistent, contrary to some opinions and perspectives of him. He has never flip-flopped on anything. He's an extremely consistent ideological libertarian. Strategies and tactics for achieving similar goals differ across time and space and with varying degrees of information availability. So if there were any, you want to call them, differences of opinion or mistakes, potentially, that's all they were. Eric is not a malicious actor. I know this as a fact. He is doing his absolute best to create a more free world, though his strategies may differ from that of different groups from time to time. He saw value in what we were doing. He made an investment and, to my face, said that he did not expect to ever get his money back or make money. He hopes he will. I hope he will. I hope we all make money on what we're doing. But he said, I think what you're building is important, necessary, and I want to fund it. And if you end up making me a bunch of money, great. Neither he nor any other investor who has put money into Start9 has any special rights. He has absolutely no official say in the company's operations whatsoever. As I mentioned, I think he's a good guy and I respect him, and obviously would love to have his advice when I seek it. But yeah, I think, things like the kind of reactions that people have to an entity like Start9, if an investor like Eric comes on board, kind of surprised me at times, actually. Like, it was, I found it a bit obnoxious that people will react in the way that they do based on personal assumptions that are often wildly inaccurate about specific people. It's like very personal. We actually have people who, would openly not criticize, but like emotionally express anger towards Start9 because Eric is investing. It has nothing to do with the technology we're building, the quality of the people building the technology, with how much integrity we're building it. Nothing. It has nothing to do with that. They're just like, I don't like your project because some person I don't like likes it. And all I can say to those people is a smile. I won't say anything to them.
Or you can tell them to look at the code, because in the end, that's what matters. They can fork it. They can build something different.
Yeah. Are we building something good and useful or not? Right? That's what you should care about.
Yeah, and about Eric Voorhees, I find it funny because back in the day, he got a lot of blame for bloating the Bitcoin network with transactions from Satoshi Dice. And now that he finally has his own chain to handle operations for, I forgot the name, Shapeshift. So he finally has a chain which has a shitcoin to handle that operation. He gets the blame for being a shitcoiner. Like, you can't really win. People are unhappy that he doesn't do stuff on Bitcoin, but on the other hand, they were not happy when he was.
Yeah, it's hard to win when there is sort of baseless ideology at stake. Now, I don't mean to say that everyone has no basis for their stances, but there is a lot of tribalism that takes place in the greater crypto and Bitcoin ecosystems. It is very much I want to call it, religious, I guess. There is you're part of this group or you're part of that group, and there are very few people who are able to stay above it and rationally assess, instances as such, and not prematurely judge or group things based on first appearance. Right now, heuristics are necessary. Stereotyping is necessary. It's what allows you to move through the world. If you didn't have any kind of heuristic basis to make decisions or assessments, then you would have to have deep conversations with every human being you walked by, lest you accidentally walk by somebody who is going to be the most important, person in your life. You need to use certain heuristics, but taken to an extreme, heuristics are wildly inefficient and destructive because you end up missing the life's most valuable things because you dismiss them based on some preconceived notion. And I think that we've hit that. I think we've crossed that line. And by we, I mean, multiple different camps in the greater crypto space. I would identify many who refer to themselves as Bitcoin maximalists. I actually would refer to them as Bitcoin tribalists. I don't have a problem with maximalism. I think that there's a very valid case to be made for why Bitcoin is the only real thing that matters right now and why protocols tend to converge to one. And without stating a personal opinion on the matter, I think that there is merit to the argument. But what we're seeing out of what many people refer to as the maximalist camp is not maximalism. This is not Bitcoin is the most important project and we find it likely that it will be the main protocol upon which all other protocols function. That's not what it has become. It has become, from certain individuals, again, I think there's actually two camps contained within that phrase. Some of them have gotten to the point where they don't even necessarily consider things that might end up being extremely valuable. And I don't mean other projects. I don't mean alternatives to Bitcoin. I just mean becoming stale in your thinking, like not, like Bitcoin itself will suffer if it is not allowed to challenge its own assumptions, to challenge its own stances and principles.
I mean, I have spoken with people who still haven't used the Lightning Network because they don't trust it and they think that the base layer is perfect as is, and they're willing to pay as much as it takes for them to do their transactions, even though I don't think they transact at all. The most they transact is to get their coins from exchanges to their personal wallets. And I can respect that. They only have that hoarder kind of attitude. But in order for the ecosystem to grow, you need to have all of these layers and you need people to actually sell. You can't just hodl forever, even if that's ideal for boosting and maximizing your purchasing power. There are people who want to be or are forced to be unbanked. So they have to actually sell to survive. And there are traders who, for whatever reason, have no conviction other than making more USD. And they are also useful. So we need to understand that all of these people are part of the community at large. And much more than that, I'm actually working on an article these days about the two schools of thought of maximalism. Because on one hand, you have the more radical side, which says Bitcoin is perfect as is, and there's nothing that we should do to it because Satoshi left us with the perfect code, and the refinements that we have brought along the way have made it better, but we don't need anything more than this. And maybe that if something like Taproot comes along, I'll think about it, but only if it gets the proper amount of review. And then there is the other side of Bitcoin maximalism, which says that altcoins are essentially experiments and their technology is going to converge into the network that is the most secure and has the soundest money. So basically, let's say that Ethereum and Zcash and Monero and all of these coins that have different ideas about money and about networks are going to end up in side chains of Bitcoin just because it's more secure and it has better money. And I very much believe that something like RSK and something like the Zcash sidechain with drive chains, that can have a huge potential, and that can increase the utility of Bitcoin at large and also increase the potential of the market. So I very much believe in that. I identify with this side of maximalism, which thinks that we can bring home every project into Bitcoin if we think hard enough. And it's going to happen because the network is a lot more robust and we have better money. These are the two arguments of the thesis.
Yes, and that is generally my stance as well. Though I also admit that, so my whole kind of approach to problem solving is very much in line with a quote from a Robert Heinlein book. I think it was either Moon is a Harsh Mistress or For Us the Living. I think it was For Us the Living. And he says numerous times in the book, if there's ever a problem that you don't understand, solve any part of it that you do understand, and then look at the whole problem again. And it tends to look different over time, right? The corollary to that is do the next right thing. It's like, yo, I don't know what the end game is. I don't know what the ultimate solution is. But I do know that it at least involves this one thing, right? Like, I don't know what the future of governance of planet Earth looks like. I don't know how to solve the problem of, protecting private property without a centralized police force. I don't know how to blah, 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 blah. I don't know these things. But I do know that any viable future, any free viable future that I want to be a part of involves this one thing. It definitely involves open source money. So let's fix that. Let's do that. And then we can talk about all this other shit, because only once we've implemented this portion of the solution will the rest of it even be worth. It's not that you can't talk about it. It's just that you have to admit when problems are beyond, that are so complex and large that they're beyond your scope to solve using theoretical discussion. Like, at some point, you just have to build something, solve some part of the puzzle, put that little piece of the puzzle in, and then step back and look at the whole puzzle again. And then maybe that time it'll look a little more clear. And if it doesn't, then solve the next thing that you know to be right, and then the next thing that you know to be right. And eventually it'll start to take shape. And so when it comes to like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Monero, and it's like, I'm not even looking at it so intensely. Like, I'm not sitting there saying that this is the solution. Like, the Bitcoin fixes this meme was good and useful and fun, but I actually find it a bit harmful in a way, because what it implies is that you know that you have the solution to humanity's problems. And what I do is I say, okay, Bitcoin is a major piece to solving humanity's problems, right? Removing central authority from the creation and distribution of money seems to me an obvious thing to do to improve humanity's lot. Okay, like we've got to set money free from government control, and so let's do that. But I don't discredit various strategies. I do discredit scams, right? If somebody is trying to use certain concepts and rhetoric to enrich themselves at the expense of not only other people, but of humanity's future, I have a problem with you and your project, and I will voice that openly, without reservation. But if you are honestly trying to create the same future that I am trying to create, and you have a different technological, political, or economic strategy for accomplishing that future, and you're doing it with integrity, I will debate you on your project about why it's not going to solve the solution better. I will advise you if you seek my advice. But if you disregard my advice, or you are unwilling to debate, and you are sort of blindly following some track that obviously seems wrong or something like that, then I won't sit there and start a fight with you, because I'll just let you lose. Right? You're going to waste your time, right? That's a personal choice. Like, you have to let people make mistakes. You have to let them fail, right? Like if the Monero team is out there trying to build a decentralized network for private transactions, and they're doing it with integrity, and it's not a scam, like nobody in the company or in the organization is like knowingly trying to extort people or scam them. Even if you disagree with their strategy and their tactics, it's like, who cares? Who cares? Like, focus on yourself, focus on your project, be productive, and stop wasting your time trying to virtue signal to everyone about your own opinions about other people's projects. It'd be like if I started a hamburger shop in Denver, and there was another hamburger shop starting up down the street, and the hamburger shop down the street was using nothing but fake meat. Okay, they're starting it up with nothing but Beyond Meat. I could sit there and go into that hamburger shop owner, sit him down and be like, look, man, if you really want to offer this fake meat stuff, go for it. But you should definitely have real meat on your menu too, because if you don't, nobody's going to come to your shop. And I could get furious with him for not starting the kind of hamburger shop that I want to run, that I want to go to. But why aren't I just building a better hamburger shop? Why aren't I just over at my place building the thing that I think I, want and that others will want, and let them go out of business? Like, why am I wasting my energy trying to yell at this person in public, nonetheless, right? With everyone standing around watching, yell at this person, telling them they're doing it wrong. He's not trying to scam anyone. He's trying to start a business that he thinks is important and viable. And if he's wrong, he's just going to lose. So what I have a problem with is the amount of energy, which amounts to, I think, virtue signaling, that is coming out of many corners of this industry, where everyone is just trying to associate themselves with an identity and trying to prove over and over to everyone else on the internet that they belong with that identity, that they fit in, all the while not contributing a damn thing. And
well,
I don't.
I think your example was an oversimplification, because in a decentralized community, which is global and has potentially millions of people, there are most likely people who have nothing better to do than to virtue signal. And even if they wanted to build something, they have nothing. So this is their shtick. This is their role. In the case of Bitcoin maximalism, I suppose they're going to say that they're white cells of the system. And it makes sense to defend it against attackers. But to attack others for no other reason other than virtue signaling and saying that it should not exist just because you think that this should reign supreme, that's a waste of energy. You could be building something and let them be wrong. But calling out scams, I think that's a good cause. The way that we define scams, that's a different conversation.
Correct. That's where the nuance exists. I agree that calling out scams is a very good function of a community member, right? Like, if you see scam, say scam. But there's a fine line between calling out a scam and calling out somebody who has a different strategy than you, but is trying to build the same future. And when you lose track of that line and you cross over to anything that's not my thing is evil and bad, and you stop considering nuance intention, integrity, you stop considering these very important nuances, I actually think that it becomes an autoimmune type of response where you actually start hurting the very thing that you're trying to protect by not allowing foreign invaders to, not foreign invaders, that's a really bad analogy, but not allowing
Call them external attackers or something.
yeah, but I don't even view it as like an attacker. It's like Monero is not attacking Bitcoin. You know what I mean? It's that, yeah, this is interesting. I clearly need to do a little bit more thinking of this on my own because I stumble over my own kind of stance here because I think it exists it's a subtlety, right? It's not a broad-based brushstroke where I can just say this is what I have a problem with and this is what I'm okay with. It's not that black and white. It's very subtle. It's like, are you acting with good intention? Are you being gracious? Like, are you giving people the benefit of the doubt? Are you even trying to think outside the box? I think that there's a very subtle point at which what was rational immune defense mechanisms become self-inflicting wounds. And it's hard to identify exactly what that line is.
I don't know. For example, I have no problem with Grin and Monero whatsoever because they had fair launches and their communities seem to focus on development and they're mostly ideologically motivated. They are more like Chaumy and eCash than Austrian economic sound money. So I don't think that they ever claim to be what they're not. Or if they did, please correct me. But with something like Ethereum, which had so many narratives and so many marketing strategies, and right now it's in the middle of calling itself ultrasound money and stuff like that. It was the world computer. It was the dApp machine. It was so much stuff like unstoppable dApps. And I don't know, it had so many taglines and catchphrases that turned out to be not true and disingenuous on the long term. It turned out to be unscalable and an Orwellian nightmare when it comes to tracking transactions because everything that you do gets stored in one wallet, and one wallet means one address, and everyone can see what you're doing there. It's so easy to observe what's happening. And I don't really like what I understand why this exists and why there are so many use cases that maybe have nothing to do with Austrian economics and the idea of sound money to which Bitcoin adheres, but is useful for stuff like tokenization and listing stocks on some sort of decentralized exchange and, stuff like that. But I disagree with the way that they have achieved it, and I think that the pre-mine and all of that approach was wrong for this space. So from the very beginning, I don't think that they started in an honest way, and they just keep on reinventing and redefining what this is. Like, I'm not even sure that they know anymore.
Yeah, we have the team at Start9 has a decent amount of experience with Ethereum, including running full nodes or full archival nodes. And when I say experience, I mean frustrations. I mean, Ethereum, technically speaking, in addition to everything you just said, is just not viable. And I have a problem with... I agree with everything that you just said. I think that Ethereum Foundation, Vitalik, and many supporters have crossed the line from honest effort to build a world computer that was sort of, technologically not quite up to snuff to a perpetuation of a knowing, fraudulent endeavor. And I think that line has been crossed, was probably crossed a couple years ago, and is now being doubled down on over and over and over again. And but I don't talk about it. Not because of, any kind of like fear of debate or argument or whatever. It's because I'm busy. I'm focused. I don't care about Ethereum. It just, is it causing some damage in terms of, harming progress and, stifling Bitcoin adoption? And maybe, I don't know. Ethereum's definitely been an interesting like lab of sorts for trying new financial instruments that I think may end up eventually being very viable and useful on Bitcoin or whatever infrastructure we end up with. So I'm not sure that all of the sort of layer 2 activities that have taken place on Ethereum were fruitless. I think that they taught us a lot about not just technologically what to and what not to do with smart contracts, but also kind of financial experimentation, like economic experimentation with things like, MakerDAO, and how can you maintain a peg without custodying the underlying asset and stuff like that. Like, how can you use interest rates to, incentivize investment or disinvestment? And I find all of that very fascinating. I don't follow it all super closely because it's kind of outside my focus at the moment. But I also recognize that like just because something is not viable long term doesn't mean its failure was a waste of time, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that. It was an interesting experiment. As opposed to you, I think that the failure didn't start a couple of years ago, but with the DAO hack, when they decided to break immutability, like, it doesn't make much sense after that. They can invent nice narratives about why they did it and come up with reasons and say, how about we create governance and stuff like that? And instead of using national jurisdictions as our point of reference, we're gonna use international human rights law or something, which sounds very nice, but human rights law is very hard to apply, and usually when there's international law, it takes a lot of time to enact anything, and by the time you have some sort of justice in the international system, it's likely that your system is already compromised. So
look, like I one time in a poker game won some ETH because that's what people were betting at the table. And then I sold it. And that's the only ETH I've ever owned. I've never bought, held, invested in, traded ETH in any way, shape, or form. And it's not because I thought it was going to go down, and it's not because I didn't think it was going to go up. It's because I didn't care. It's because, in line with what I said earlier around solving problems, I viewed Ethereum's existence as an attempt to solve a much larger problem than anyone on Earth understood at the time, or still understands, right? You were talking about governance. We're talking about like, how will humans govern themselves in the future in a better way than we governed ourselves in the past? How do we create more free and prosperous societies? I think decentralization is a major, if not the primary ingredient for those improvements. But it's a very big, complex problem that we do not understand yet because we have only just now invented decentralized consensus mechanisms with Bitcoin. And so I have no idea what the future of human governance looks like. I've thought about it, but I don't have any like clear solutions. I just am sort of, coming at the problem from different angles from time to time and allowing it to evolve in my own head and reading things and watching things and building things. But I don't have the solution, and nobody does. And so what I viewed Ethereum's my biggest gripe or sort of condemnation, I guess, or criticism that I have is that it was supremely arrogant. It was supremely naive and arrogant in its assumptions and its ambitions. Ethereum, it's like we invented decentralized consensus mechanism in Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin comes out and says, "Dear humanity, Satoshi, I have created a system that is capable of solving the Byzantine general problem, and you can rely on the information produced from the system without having to trust any particular component of the system." It's this massive breakthrough in human history. And like right after it's done, Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation come out and they say, we're going to use this technology invented by Satoshi and implemented in Bitcoin to solve governance. And I'm like, can't we just do money first? Like, let's try using the system to do the one thing that it was designed to do well. Let's carry that over the finish line. Let's actually implement good, hard, decentralized, open, permissionless, borderless money on Earth. Let's do that. And then we will look at the problem again. The problem being how to create more free and prosperous societies on Earth. That's the ultimate problem that all of humanity is trying to solve forever, is how do we create more free and prosperous societies? And Bitcoin was this massive puzzle piece, right? Free, hard, open source, decentralized money. And Ethereum was like, let's solve the next thing before we've solved this thing, even though we do not in any way understand the thing we're trying to solve. And so I viewed the whole thing as just like, get out of here. Like, guys, like, come on, you're wasting your time and you're lying to people. You're telling them that you have solved problems that you don't even understand.
Oh, not only that, but I recall in 2017 reading articles on Cointelegraph and websites like that about all the fields of work that are going to become obsolete because of smart contracts. Like, we're gonna get rid of lawyers because we're gonna automate smart contracts and that's it. Goodbye. You're gonna be out of work.
Right. It's silly and irrational to the point of irresponsible, right? Like at some point you're actually, by trying to do something that you can't do, by trying to solve a problem that you don't understand and misleading people into believing that you have solved it, that you have a solution, is fraudulent. It is irresponsible at least, and fraudulent at most, and potentially very destructive along the way. And so when I see that, I didn't sit there and, I've had conversations with people about it and I've voiced my opinion just like I'm doing now. But I think about Ethereum about as much as I think about, something else I'm not doing. It like, to me, it's just some dumb thing that's happening over there, and I'm trying to stay focused on the thing that matters. And if somebody brings it up and wants to talk about it, of course, I'll share my opinion. But yeah, I don't think about Ethereum ever. I am extremely focused on what we are building at Start9, which is essentially a platform for Bitcoin and other self-hosted services. And I think about Bitcoin a lot because I think it's the most important battleground of our generation.
Yeah, but in my case, I read about Bitcoin, I think in 2012 or 2013 for the first time. It was on some meme page, which was making fun of the price drop. And it was interesting at the time, but I did not see the purpose of it. Like, I looked at it and was like, I have a bank account. I can pay for whatever I want. Why would I need this internet money? I did not see any value in it. I did not get it. It was not for me, obviously. If I were living in a third world country, which is under some sort of authoritarian regime, maybe that reading about that kind of money would have changed my life. But at the time, I was not ready. I had no experience with economics. I had no experience with censorship. I did not get this. I thought it was just not for myself. But in 2016, when I read about Ethereum, it blew my mind. It was like everything I've ever wanted to find all packaged in one project. And it sounded so nice and so good. And I was hoping that this would work. And when I started digging into it and researching, I actually invested in Ethereum before I did in Bitcoin. And I feel disappointed about myself that I did that. But as soon as I deconstructed all of these narratives and I understood what smart contracts actually mean and what world computer actually means, because it sounds so nice, it's such a great hype word. It makes you think that it's going to encapsulate everything under the sun. And then you watch CryptoKitties basically destroy this entire beautiful dream just because it has so many transactions that its blockchain can no longer process anything and it becomes expensive. And it makes you wonder, okay, I've been thinking about decentralizing everything that nowadays is censorship friendly. And that's out of the question when you have a system that's so fragile, so unscalable, and at the same time, if it were any different, it would get centralized. I'm pretty sure that these problems are going to get fixed maybe in 20 years when we have better technology, just like I've listened to David Chaum speak about his design with eCash, and he said it was centralized and revolved around an institution that of which he was CEO, only because at the time there was not enough computing power to ask every person around the world to run a node. So by the time Bitcoin came around, it was a lot different. And computing has evolved and everyone had a computer in their houses to be able to validate transactions. So it was kind of a different scenario. I'm pretty sure that a lot of what we have today is going to be much more feasible maybe in 20 years when computing gets more powerful and we're going to have a lot more storage and it will not be an issue if this happens. And not only that, but we're going to have many more optimizations. And coming back to Bitcoin, I appreciate that the developers are trying to minimize the amount of data that gets stored into blocks so that it becomes so much more efficient, and you have these small blocks which instead of getting increased in size, you're going to have smaller transaction sizes so that you have more transactions fit into that small block, which I think is very much in the spirit of refinement. And it may not sound like it's disruptive. It may look boring from an outsider's view, but it's the kind of elegant software that we actually need. Just like compression doesn't sound like the sexiest idea for software, but it has saved so much money for companies that host files.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you take, data optimization, right? Bitcoin is pushing the limits of computer science, right? In its sync times and its, quote, compression, right? Ways that it is saving space in blocks. But all of it doesn't matter at infinity in terms of the blockchain is still growing, right? So any optimizations will cause the blockchain to grow slower, which is great. But in 2,000 years, Bitcoin won't be around, I'm sure, but in 2,000 years, Bitcoin's still the dominant thing, whatever, the blockchain is going to be massive. Unless you are, new technologies will come along that allow you to bootstrap state trustlessly without syncing from Genesis. There will be ways to, use pruned nodes for absolutely everything, which is already getting really good. There will be innovations that come along, but saving block space is ultimately a way to buy time. It's a way to buy time to invent solutions that make it so that you don't have to have the whole blockchain, that you don't have to sync the whole thing from Genesis. Because at scale, in hundreds of years, it doesn't matter how efficient the blocks are. If you still have to sync from Genesis and store the whole blockchain, you're screwed, no matter how small they are, right? Like, it's the recognition that if Satoshi had launched with, if Bitcoin originally had, quarter megabyte blocks, that everyone would be up in arms about quadrupling the block size to 1 megabyte. And the reason for that is because the blockchain is going to grow faster. Not because it's going to grow. It's going to grow no matter what you do. And at scale, it's going to be massive no matter what you do. It's about buying time. So keeping the block sizes small is not this overall solution to, that's how we make Bitcoin usable in the future. It's how we make Bitcoin usable today while we build alternative solutions, layer 2, layer 3, and alternative layer 1 approaches such as pruning and bootstrapping state, not from Genesis, etc. So we're buying time. And so I agree with your applauding of how the block size wars went, and every attempt made by Bitcoin Core and everyone working on Bitcoin to keep the blocks as small as possible, to keep the chain as efficient as possible. I'm just saying that all of those efforts are completely fruitless if we do not, in the meantime, invent wholly other scaling strategies like Lightning and layer 3 technologies, and again, layer 1 pruning technologies.
Okay, let me take this back to Start9 Labs and Embassy OS. And I'm looking at the list of applications, and you seem to cover everything from money to money processors to file storage to sort of Tor. I suppose you're also going to include some sort of VPN. There's a mention there that there will be a service launched by Start9 that's a VPN. And what else do you think would be useful but you cannot integrate at this time?
Interestingly enough, there is no category of software that cannot be integrated into our operating system that I'm aware of. We've talked about this quite a bit. So in fact, on the marketplace today, we've made an effort to offer every major category of computer software. So we have, like you said, we have consensus systems like Bitcoin. We have financial systems, payment systems like Lightning. We have social network. We have messaging. We have data. We have password management. What we don't have yet is budgeting, like personal finances, like where you could put together, sort of a self-hosted kind of Mint, like app where you can put your budget in and integrate your various, financials and have it pop out a budget, and you're not relying on a third party, maybe accounting software. But these are all kind of like, at that point, we're just talking about more and more functionality. 030 only augments the number of things that you can run on your Embassy because it introduces speed and storage capacity with the SSD support. So, for example, today you can run Bitcoin on your Embassy, but it is a pruned node only. You cannot run a full archival node because we don't have the storage space. And that limits what you can run on top of it, right? So many things will run fine against a pruned node. In fact, we are running quite a few things against your pruned node. We're running BTC Pay, LND, C Lightning, Sphinx, Ride the Lightning, Thunder Hub. These are all running on your Embassy, all in parallel, all at the same time, all against the same pruned node. It's extremely efficient, right? Like in line with the core developers' attempt to keep Bitcoin lean and mean and efficient and small, we at Start9 are also saying, look, our operating system, should be able to do things lean. Like I'm running 15 services on my Embassy, all in parallel, all at the same time, all over Tor, including Bitcoin in both Lightning implementations. And I'm using a grand total of 10 gigabytes of data and 50% of the CPU and RAM available on my Pi. So it's extremely efficient. And that has been a core focus of ours, is to not use the brute force attempt of throw more hardware at it, throw more disk space at it. We're trying to squeeze every drop of efficiency that we can out of very minimalist hardware, and then add more space when you really just want to crank up the juice. And so, at this point, if you look at our service roadmap on the website, which I think you were looking at, that thing is old and stale, and we need to update that. And that's just kind of a sampling that we threw up there just to kind of like give people a picture of, broadly what the capabilities of this thing are and will be. The real service roadmap for Embassy OS is the community forum, where people are saying, I want this and I want that and I'll build this, because we at Start9 physically will not determine the service roadmap. It's whatever anyone wants to package up. So we have what we call our service packaging guide, which is posted online. It's very easy to follow. It's very easy to set up and do a Hello World app, where if there's a piece of software that you love to use, it's self-hosted and open source, and currently requires you to get on the command line and download things and manage dependencies and install Docker and blah, 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 and you would like to see it available on the Embassy as a button, there's nothing stopping you. In fact, there's many things encouraging you from packaging it up, using our packaging guide, and putting it on the marketplace for everyone on earth to download and use, including yourself. And we've had multiple people from the community do this. And so we do not intend in any way to gate or determine what will be available for the Embassy. In fact, we fully expect many non-Bitcoin software systems and blockchains will be on the Embassy marketplace. And we think that people should be able to do whatever they want with their own computer, that we as a company not only shouldn't be able to, but we actually can't physically. We've designed the system such that we can't stop this. So if somebody is hell-bent on Monero, which I believe it was the Haven team. So Haven is a fork of Monero. Somebody at their team found the Embassy and was like, oh my God, I really want everyone on Earth to be able to push a button and be running a Haven node. And since Haven is a fork of Monero, they were like, I'll package up Monero while I'm at it too. So both Haven and Monero have already been packaged for Embassy OS as one-click installs, full node, pruned, etc. We at Start9 have not advertised those on our marketplace because we are still strategizing the marketplace itself, as in we do not want to be, Start9 does not want to be a Apple-style draconian gatekeeper of our own marketplace. We want any software, even if it's software that we vehemently disagree with and think should not exist, we think it's malware, whatever, we do not want to prevent somebody who is determined to run that software from running it. And in fact, if we could prevent them, we would be Apple. We would be no different if we actually had the ability to prevent them. So what we're doing instead is creating we'll call it recommended space, where Start9 is going to put its reputation on the line and say, this piece of software is something that we approve, that we recommend, or we think is safe. We're basically saying, we can't guarantee, because this is open source stuff that's changing, but we personally feel comfortable ethically and from a security and privacy perspective saying you should run this software, or that you can run this software. Then there will be everything else, where it's like you're kind of on your own if you're shopping in that corner of the store. You can be certain we have signature validation mechanisms in O3O that you can be certain that you are in fact running the software you think you're running. So if you download Bitcoin or you download Monero or whatever, you can be certain that you're actually running Monero, that it's not some alternative binary or malware that you're installing. But we, Start9, will not stamp our name on it if we don't think it is viable. And so anyway, the reason we haven't released some of these other software services is because 0.30, our next operating system version, is when we introduce this, quote, segregated marketplace. It's where the marketplace will be the like Start9 stamped and kind of reviewed things, and then the like community services that you're sort of installing at your own risk.
I like the sound of that. And I suppose at some point you're going to end up in a situation just like Apple did with cracking that iPhone 5C, I think, with when they refused to crack the cryptography of that phone, even though they ended up having stricter regulations, which in the next OS they were coerced to have some sort of backdoors for the NSA, and that sucked. But I can imagine you ending up in a situation where you get asked by the authorities to take down some sort of applications, and you say, we can't do that. And they're gonna have to deal with the situation in which they cannot control anything because you cannot control it. And the best they can do is use good old-fashioned investigations to figure out who's running it and how to close it down.
Yep. And on top of that, even that's going to be hard because the system is designed, there's no like preceding of keys. There's no, like, everything is generated by you when you set up your embassy, all the Tor hidden services. It's all client-side cryptography. It's all like Start9 has no insight into what you're running, where you got it from, nothing. I mean, you can even sideload applications onto your embassy, right? You don't even have to go to the marketplace. As in, today when you download a service from our marketplace, it is our marketplace, as in we are hosting those servers where you're downloading the binaries, which means a government agency could walk into our office and say, you guys are allowing people to download Bitcoin from your marketplace, so we're going to make you stop and take Bitcoin off. And we would have to say, okay, like we have no recourse. It is under our control. Bitcoin could be censored from our marketplace. However, we built into Embassy OS, the primitive of Embassy OS, like the basic functioning of it, that the user can easily visit alternative marketplaces, and that those marketplaces can be hosted on ephemeral Tor v3 hidden service hosts. So in other words, if somebody ever came in and told us to, censor our marketplace or do something, whatever, then everyone on Earth who's running an embassy, like some random person could just be like, okay, well, I'll spin up a marketplace, which is also an open protocol. So Embassy OS marketplaces are a protocol spec that we wrote and we implemented, and we have one. We have a marketplace, and we're the only one right now. But there is nothing on Earth that stops anyone on Earth from using the Embassy marketplace protocol spec to spin up their own marketplace and host Bitcoin on it. And therefore, anyone who's running an embassy can simply plug in the Tor onion URL of your marketplace, which you're hosting anonymously, by the way. Like nobody on Earth even knows that you are the person who's hosting that website, hosting that marketplace. I could plug it into my embassy and boom, I'm shopping. I'm shopping in a different store and I download Bitcoin, and it abides by all the same signature validation schemes and everything that our marketplace did. So we are actively trying to make ourselves irrelevant and powerless in this system, knowing that even if we do that, we will still be relevant because we are the ones pushing the protocol forward. We are the ones, building it. We are the ones who have the brand and name recognition. Like people are going to want to shop in our marketplace, but they don't have to. That's the important part.
Yeah, this approach reminds me of what I was reading in Timothy May's Cypherpunk FAQ, the Cyphernomicon, and I think it's useful to have this kind of services. So how can people follow you and see what's going on with Start9 and when you add new features?
The most activity takes place in our Telegram channel, which is gradually being migrated to our Matrix channel. Because now that we have released Matrix on the embassy, and if you don't know what Matrix is, you and your listeners, you should go look it up. Matrix is, in our opinion, the most advanced, featureful, redundant, safe, secure, and private messaging protocol the world has ever seen. It can be self-hosted. Not only that, it's designed to be self-hosted, end-to-end encrypted, group chats, DMs, video, audio, media, you name it. It is a full-featured, self-hosted, end-to-end encrypted, extremely featureful messaging protocol, of which there are multiple implementations. The first was Synapse, which is written in Python, which is what we currently offer on the embassy. There are new ones coming. Dendrite is written in Go. Conduit is written in Rust. Those will be coming, we think, later this year. They'll be coming out of alpha. And we will offer those implementations on the embassy as well. But anyway, we are betting big on Matrix. We think it's the solution to messaging, private, secure, sovereign, independent messaging on this planet. We think it's the solution. And it's a button on the embassy. It blows signal out of the water in every way, shape, or form. And that is where we're moving our community chat. So if you want to stay part of the conversation, you can join our Telegram channel. From there, you will immediately get prompted to join our Matrix channel, which you can do by creating an account on somebody else's Matrix server or by buying an embassy and running your own Matrix server, which is the sovereign recommended way to do it, and then joining our community channel there. Obviously, we have a Twitter account that we post updates to whenever we have a new release or any kind of meaningful announcement. And every member of the team, including myself, is pretty much available. I direct message with multiple community members and customers on a daily basis. Like, I am a single direct message away, happy to answer any questions or help in any way that I can, as is the rest of the team. We're very engaging, always present team.
You know, you actually gave me a good idea. I should look into Matrix and see if I can get some of the podcast community on there to talk. I've tried to make Sphinx work, but it's so buggy that most people gave up on it.
Yeah. Right. We offer Sphinx on the embassy. It's on our marketplace. You know, it is a very cool project. It had a lot of buzz. It was a super creative way to do messaging, you know, as messages on Lightning transactions. Messaging doesn't need to be done that way, right? All you need for a viable messaging system is two servers talking to each other. It doesn't need to be built as a layer 3 application on Bitcoin. So I like Sphinx. I like Paul over at Sphinx. I run Sphinx on my phone. I'm in that channel, but we do not at Start9 view Sphinx as the likely most viable messaging platform of the future. We think Matrix, with Lightning payments integrated, is better than messaging on Lightning itself. So we are working with the Matrix team, not aggressively at present, because we're still trying to refine the basic usage of Matrix on Embassy and waiting for alternative protocols to emerge, or not alternative protocols, alternative implementations of the Matrix protocol. But we will be working with them and others to integrate Lightning payments into the Matrix protocol, such that in any chat, DM or otherwise, group chat, you can tip and pay for content, such that I could post a picture in a group chat and you can only see the picture if you send me sats. And that is all perfectly integratable into Matrix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds interesting. And I'm not sure if I have any more questions for you at this time, but I very much look forward to having you on the podcast once again. Possibly when you launch WordPress, because to me, that's one of the most major breakthroughs ever. I pay, I think, $200 a year for the hosting of my website. And that's 40 gigabytes SSD space with lots of other nice features that I get, but it would be nice to migrate everything to a Raspberry Pi that I run from my own house, and I get better storage and faster at a cheaper price. So I look forward to that.
So do we. That somewhat inherently involves our ClearNet story, right? Like, not many people want to host their website as a Tor v3 onion URL. But if you do, like you personally, if you wanted to have your website also available as a Tor v3 URL, you could even do a vanity address where like the first 6 letters are, Bitcoin or something like that. You can already do that on the Embassy. We have a service on the Embassy Marketplace called Embassy Pages that we ourselves wrote. This was not a pre-existing piece of software. We wrote it. And it allows you to very easily host a website as a Tor v3 hidden service on your Embassy, accessible from anywhere in the world, censorship resistant, etc. And that exists today. You can do that on your Embassy in a matter of minutes today.
So if you have listened to the podcast up to this point, I suppose that you have found out how you can generate your own vanity onion address with the Embassy OS. I suppose that this information should have been mentioned earlier on, but this is like an extra for being a hero and listening to almost 3 hours of recording. So thank you very much, Matt. And I look forward to doing another one of these as soon as you launch new services.
That sounds great. Thanks again for having me on. It's been really nice meeting you and talking with you.
Likewise.
Golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin. Voltoro.
Wasabi Wallet's innovative coin joins will make your bitcoins more fungible. So if you accumulate more than 0.1 BTC, you can mix it with other users to remove all traces about their whereabouts. So it's like putting multiple fingerprints on your dollar bills, and it becomes impossible to determine the last few owners of the money. Download Wasabi Wallet today and start coin joining.